Hi, welcome back to Elite Literary Book Group. I'm Rachel Beck, and today I'm going to finish To Kill a Mockingbird. So, I'm probably going to do more summarizing than I would normally do, but I mean, it doesn't make sense to make two videos when there's not a whole lot to analyze. It's just wrapping up the story. So, she begins chapter 27 by saying, "Things did settle down after a fashion, as Atticus said they would." But then she gives you three incidents that happen involving Bob Ewell. And he seems to be just lurking around, trying to intimidate people, scare them in some way, anybody who had anything to do with the trial. So one of those people that he tries to harass a little bit is actually Judge Taylor. He's in his yard, hears something, and she says that when Miss Taylor came home from church, she found her husband in the chair, lost in the writings of Bob Taylor, with a shotgun across his lap. The other incident happens to Helen, Tom's wife. So Link Dees, who had hired Tom, has now hired Helen, because somebody has to help them. And so he hired her, I think, as a cook. But she can't go to his house without walking like a complete mile out of the way, because if she gets anywhere near the Ewells, the kids start chunking things at her. And finally, Link Dees has enough of this when he finds out that he's kind of stalking her, following her, creeping along behind her, and Link Dees yells at him that you need to stop or I'll put you in jail myself. And after that, after he gets confronted, he sort of backs off. But he's not done. And as Aunt Alexandra points out, says, I know that kind are about paying off grudges, but I don't understand why he should harbor one. He had his way in court, didn't he? And Atticus says, yes, but he thought he'd be a hero. But all he got for his pain was, well, okay, we'll convict this Negro, but now you go back to your dump. And he's also realized that, you know, his credibility has been lost either way. Even though it seemed like he got to win, he didn't win any respect from the people. Because back in, even though they're not acting as fairly as they should about Tom being wrongly convicted, they're not going to embrace Mr. Ewell either. So Bob Ewell is really not doing much. She says in the beginning that she didn't know anybody could be fired from a WPA job for laziness. But she says, I suppose his brief burst of fame brought on a briefer burst of industry. But his job lasted only as long as his notoriety. Mr. Ewell found himself as forgotten as Tom Robinson. Okay, so, and by the way, this is a little bit of an allusion. She makes a couple of allusions to the New Deal. And one is the WPA. And then later she's talking to her dad about the NRA, which at this time was known as the National Recovery Act, I think. Yeah, Recovery Act. And the slogan, I think this is why it's significant, is that this Recovery Act was supposed to regulate industry so that people had to pay their employees more, kind of like hiring a higher minimum wage, and they needed to try to keep their prices low. And the slogan that they used was, you know, we do our part. And the President Roosevelt was very good at getting people to understand that we're all in this together. Like, one man isn't going to stop the depression and fix things, but if everybody does their part, then we can help each other out. We can all make sacrifices. Now, of course, a lot of people are going to see this as socialism and call him a socialist. The other thing you hear that I skipped over, I didn't mean to, but I just forgot to mention it, was during the party that Aunt Alexandra's having, and they're talking about the gossip in the town, you hear Mrs. Roosevelt's name. And what is she doing? But she's having lunch with black people. She's even inviting them to the White House. So this is, this would be about 1933 when that act was seen as unconstitutional. And during this time, so Eleanor Roosevelt is seen as a radical, and FDR seen as, a socialist. And you see a little bit of that background history kind of come back up in the book. And he said that people had taken their stickers from the NRA, "We will do our part," down. I asked Atticus why, and he said it was because the National Recovery Act was dead. I asked who killed it, and he said 9 old men. So, meaning the Supreme Court. So, although I think, what Roosevelt did was very good for this country, you could make an argument that once you start having these social programs and the federal government gets more and more involved, there's no slowing it down. Like, it won't go back to a smaller size. I think it's important that she brings it back up because it's also about, the book is about community, and, it's about helping each other survive. So with that said, let's get to the part where she says at the very end of that chapter that they're about to go to a pageant, and this pageant was just going to be like a historic, I guess, play in a way about the history of Macomb. It doesn't sound very exciting. The kids are dressed up as like ham. She's a ham, which is also kind of what people used to say when somebody was kind of a character. She's a ham. But then another person is see Cecil as a cow, and then someone is a butter bean. It doesn't sound like it's going to be all that exciting, but it would be probably exciting for, a town that has nothing else to do. So everyone is supposed to be there. Oddly, everyone except Atticus, because Atticus was tired and Aunt Alexandra decided not to go. So Scout and Jim are going to walk there together. And they're walking there. It's very late at night. And this is not something we would probably do this day and age with children. But this would have been very normal. And so, but the thing is, if you've ever been in a small town, when it's dark outside, it is pitch black. You cannot see anything. So she talks about that as they're going there, and Scout's in a costume that she can barely move in. It took if you imagine what old-time costumes would have been, it has chicken wire, and it's like, a heavy ham thing over. She has no use of her arms, and all she's got is a little bit of a peephole for her eyes, and she has to have help taking it on or off. This is going to become important in a little bit, but she's just giving you those kind of details to let you know what kind of situation she was in and what kind of night it was, and that it was also Halloween. And so the kids end up going together, and the last sentence of the chapter says, "Thus began our longest journey together." Okay, and then we get to what happens. There's they're walking there to the pageant together, and they're talking about how dark it is. They can't see. Somebody comes out from behind the bushes, and it's Cecil. And he says, "Oh, I got you." And Jim says, "Oh, this is actually kind of a good thing, because now Scout can hang out with Cecil and I can go with my friends." So he gives her some money, and like I said, I'm just going to summarize a little bit of this. We don't really need to get into the play. She does miss her cue, which apparently is when Mrs. Merriweather, who's taking this all very too seriously, yells "pork." That's when Scout's supposed to be running out, but it was so boring that Scout was probably nearly asleep and didn't hear it. And people just thought that was hilarious, because, you know, the best part about going to see kids at a play or a pageant is to see them mess up. You know, that's the entertaining part. And she always ends up managing, I don't know if you've ever been one of these kids, but just always ends up managing being the entertainment, when she had no intention to do that at all. But it always seems like people are laughing at her for something. And so even though everybody thought it was cute, Mrs. Merriweather lets her know that she ruined the pageant, made her feel bad about herself. So Jim's trying to cheer her up, and they're walking back, and they're kind of spooked out again. Jim keeps hearing something. He keeps hearing, you know, like you can hear sometimes if a dog is behind you in the woods, just by the way, you know, the sounds that it makes as it hits the leaves and so forth. You can almost tell by the sound of someone's footsteps. And they know this isn't, at first they think it's Cecil again. But then they realize this is not a kid, it's not kid, and it's not an animal. And she describes him as having kind of this swaggering, slow walk. So Jim tells her to be quiet, and that's when she starts getting a little worried, because she could see that Jim is worried. She says, well, maybe it's Cecil, and she yells out something to him, and nothing happens. And then Jim is thinking ahead, and he's looking at her costume, knowing she can't run, she can hardly walk in it. "Can you take this off?" And she says, "I don't have anything under it." She also realized that she had forgotten her shoes. So Scout's already just having a very bad night. And let me just read. Oh, it gets, okay, the shufflefoot had not stopped with us this time. So every time they stopped, the feet behind them would stop. And so, but this time he was running towards us with no child steps. "Run, Scout, run, run." Jim screams, and she loses her balance, and something crushed the chicken wire around me. The metal ripped on metal, and I fell to the ground. And she's sort of rolling because she's in this costume. She also hears, she says, "Someone rolled against me, and I felt Jim. He was up like lightning and pulling me with him, but my head and shoulders, though my head and shoulders were free, I was so entangled I couldn't get very far. We were nearly to the road when I felt Jim's hand leave me, felt him jerk backwards to the ground. More scuffling, and then there came a dull, crunching sound. Jim screamed. I ran in the direction of Jim's scream and sank into a flabby male stomach. Its owner said, "Ugh," and tried to catch my arms, but they were tightly pinioned. His stomach was soft, but his arms were like steel. He slowly squeezed the breath out of me. I could not move. Suddenly he was jerked backwards and flung on the ground, almost carrying me with him. I thought Jim saw. So she thought it was Jim who was getting this guy off of her. And then she hears things are still again. There's no more fighting. But for someone who's breathing heavily and staggering, I thought he was going to the tree and to lean against it. He coughed violently, a sobbing, bone-shaking cough. So then she looks for Jim, and she sees that this mystery man has now picked up Jim and is walking in the direction to the house. So she's following him. She doesn't know who he is. It says that he was carrying Jim, and Jim's arm was dangling crazily in front of him. Okay, so they get to the house. Of course, Atticus and Aunt Alexandra call the ambulance, and then they call the doctor, I shouldn't say ambulance, and then they call Heck Tate. And Scout keeps asking, is he dead? Is Jim dead? And now Jim is apparently unconscious. So the doctor comes, he talks to her for a little bit, and then is where Heck Tate comes in. And Atticus says, I don't know anybody low down enough to do such a thing. And Mr. Tate says, sit down, Mr. Finch. And so they sit down, and he says, well, let me tell you what I found. I found a little girl's dress. Is that your dress, Scout? Yes, sir. It's the pink one. And then he finds this mashed up costume, and then he sort of looks as if he has something very serious to say. His fingers sought his long nose. What is it, Heck? Said Atticus. Mr. Tate found his neck and rubbed it. Bob Ewell's lying on the ground under the tree down yonder, with a kitchen knife stuck under his ribs. He's dead, Mr. Finch. So that ends that chapter. Okay, so as we're getting to the end, Atticus has it in his head that Jim must have been the one who killed Bob Ewell. And am I missing something here? No, okay. And first he asks Scout, to explain everything. But first, Atticus says that, Mr. Ewell must have been out of his mind. And Heck Tate says, I hate to contradict you, Mr. Finch. It wasn't crazy. It was mean as hell. It was a low-down skunk with enough liquor in him to make him brave enough to kill children. He would never have done that face to face. And he brought up the fact that, he would go and pester these people kind of in a very sneaky way. He wouldn't go to Atticus face to face and try to fight Atticus. He would go through his children. And it sort of made sense given his past behavior with Helen, with the judge. So Scout tells him what happens, and she says, then somebody yanked Mr. Ewell down. Jim must have got up, I guess. That's all I know. And then Mr. Tate was looking at me sharply. Somebody was staggering around and panting and coughing fit to die. I thought it was Jim at first, but didn't sound like him. So I went back looking for Jim on the ground, and I thought Atticus had come to help us. And, well, who was it? Why, there he is, Mr. Tate. He can tell you his name. And she realizes that it's Boo Radley. And he's there. He's kind of in the corner. If you see the movie, this was actually Robert Duvall's first performance. And he's Boo, of all things. And he's incredibly shy and scared, not used to being around very many people. But somehow he's a part of all this. Now, Atticus is not really putting it all together. But at this point, you know, she sees him and his lips parted into a timid smile. Our neighbor's image blurred with my sudden tears. "Hey, Boo," I said. And sometimes just reading that part for people can be a real tearjerker. I must not be in the mood today. But some people I've even seen have t-shirts that say "Hey, Boo" on it. It's a very cute idea. But anyways, that's just kind of the sweet, the innocence of the child. This was a man they were always convinced they were afraid of. And he ends up saving them. So, back to Atticus, when he's already thinking like a lawyer of what he's going to do about Jim. And he says, no, he's 13, I can't remember. Anyways, it'll have to come before county court. "What will, Mr. Finch?" said Tate. "Of course it would have to be clear self-defense, but I'll have to go to the office and hunt up. Mr. Finch, do you think Jim killed Bob Ewell?" "You heard what Scout said. There's no doubt about it. She said Jim got up and yanked him." He said, "Mr. Finch, hold on. Jim never stabbed Bob Ewell." Atticus was silent for a moment. And he looked at Mr. Tate as if he appreciated what he was trying to say. He says, "It's mighty kind of you. I know you're doing it from that good heart of yours, but don't start anything like that." And so they kind of go back and forth because Atticus is, you know, of course he is a man of integrity, and he wants to do things that are fair. You know, Jim shouldn't get out of this just because his dad's a lawyer, and that's what people are going to think and say. And he doesn't want Jim to go on with that reputation. But Atticus has it all wrong anyways. And so finally, Mr. Tate says to him, "I'm not thinking about Jim." I think he says something else before he says, "God damn it, I'm not thinking about Jim." There we go, it's a little more dramatic. And I think then maybe it occurs to him at that point, even though it's not really said, that the person here that would end up going to trial is Boo. That he would have been the only one who could do it. And Atticus notices that Heck's got this switchblade. He says, "Where'd you get that knife?" And he says, "I got it off the trunk, man." And so the sheriff basically decides from his own conscience that he's got to take things in his own hands. And no, it's not the legal way, but it is the right way. And as he has to try to convince Atticus of this, who is the man who said, you know, that the only thing that is more important or goes against majority rule is a man's conscience. And so Tate says, "Look, I'm not a very good man, but I'm the sheriff of Macomb County. I've lived in this town all my life, and I'm going on 43 years, and I'm going on 43 years old. Know everything that's happened here since, before I was born. There's a black boy dead for no reason, and the man responsible for it is dead. Let the dead bury the dead this time, Mr. Finch. Let the dead bury the dead." And it seems like there's this, you know, poetic justice to what happens. Ewell is gone. He's already been responsible for the life of Tom Robinson. How do we know what would actually happen to Boo? Even if it's clearly self-defense, can you really trust that people are going to see it that way? What if they run off with some false narrative? They already think Boo is a killer. So to put him also in another way that Tate explains this to Atticus, he says, "Taking the one man who's done you and this town a great service and dragging him in his shy ways into the limelight, to me that's a sin. It's a sin, and I'm not about to have it on my head." If I was any other man, any other man, it'd be different, but not this man, Mr. Finch. And he says, you know, I may not be much, but I'm still the sheriff of Macomb County. And I say that Bob Ewell fell on his knife. Good night, sir. And so Atticus says, Scout, Mr. Ewell fell on his knife. Can you understand? And she says that Mr. Tate was right. And Atticus says, what do you mean? And she says, well, it'd be sort of like shooting a mockingbird, wouldn't it? So now you're kind of going full circle with the title. What does mockingbird really mean? What does it stand for? And it stands for innocence. And so if you read the title without the mockingbird and you put in innocence, the title would be To Kill Innocence. And it's a coming-of-age story, so it is killing the innocence of children. It killed the innocence of Tom. And in a way, the town could have killed the innocence of Boo Radley. So some things just can't be trusted in the court system, amazingly enough. So at any rate, so you get to the last chapter, and she walks Boo home. He goes and he says goodnight to Jim. You can tell he's very awkward. And he asked her if she would take him home. And they go arm in arm. And she says that, you know, if Miss Stephanie Crawford was watching from her window, she would see Arthur Radley escorting me down the sidewalk as any gentleman would do. So wouldn't that be surprising to see what the truth is, to see what the truth of the situation is, and not the made-up story. And she ends, I think, with a kind of a summary of her own coming of age about, it reminds me of a T.S. Eliot quote about, once we're done with all of our exploration, we'll come back home and see the place for the first time. And you've been gone from home from a long time, a lot of things have happened, experience, maturity. And when you come back, even if a lot of things haven't changed, you've changed. And you see things in a very different light. And so very quickly, I'll just kind of, read a little bit of this. And daylight in my mind, the night faded, and the daytime in the neighborhood was busy. Miss Stephanie Crawford crossed the street to tell the latest to Miss Rachel. Miss Maudie bent over her azaleas. It was summertime, and two children scampered down the sidewalk toward a man approaching them in the distance. The man waved. The children raced each other to him. It was still summertime, and the children came closer. A boy trudged down the sidewalk, dragging a fishing pole behind him. A man stood waiting with his hands on his hips. Summertime, and his children played in the front yard with their friend, enacting a strange little drama of their own invention. It was fall, and his children fought on the sidewalk in front of Mrs. DeBoe's. The boy helped his sister to her feet, and they made their way home. Fall and his children trotted to and fro around the corner, and the day's woes and triumphs was on their faces. They stopped at an oak tree, delighted, puzzled, apprehensive. Winter and his children shivered at the frost gate, silhouettes against the blazing house. Winter, and a man walked in the street, dropped his glasses, shot a dog. Summer, and he watched his children's heart break. Autumn again, and Boo's children needed him. Atticus was right. One time he said, you never really know a man until you stand in his shoes and walk around in them. Just standing on the Radley porch was enough. Okay, and then it sort of fades out in wrapping up the story. Atticus is in Jim's room. He's reading a story. It's The Gray Ghost. And Scout climbs on his lap and asks him to read it. He says, it's going to be scary. She says, that's okay, I won't be scared. And it ends basically with her back at her dad's lap and falling asleep and him putting her to bed. And as he's doing that, she's talking a little bit about the book, and she's saying a little bit about what people are like, and she says, why, he hasn't done any of those things, and because he was real nice. His hands were under my chin, pulling the cover up around me. Most people are, Scout, when you finally see them. He turned out the light and went into Jim's room. He would be there all night, and he would be there when Jim waked up in the morning. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this story. And it's kind of one thing about classic stories, or even I've noticed that if you watch a really good movie, it should stay with you, like someone's fragrance. You don't forget about it very often. You may never forget. If you've properly read the book and have really gotten into it, it'll be something you never forget. It has a lasting impression on you. And anyways, so I will start uploading the videos I did for Their Eyes Are Watching God. It's a little bit dated, and it was kind of meant for another course. It sometimes talks about AP. I realize not everybody is going to be an AP student, and that's okay. And just basically what I'm doing right now, analyzing it, piece by piece. All right, well, thanks for staying with me. I appreciate it. Thank you.